the reason I'm sitting down is what I'm talking about, what I want to talk about with you all is I think the most important thing in front of everybody in this room is how we change the minds of the people that we live among. I mean, we live here in the bluest of blue states. We all know that. You know, I think there are probably people in this room who are estranged from friends, family, co-workers, lost work. I've lost work in the movie business for sure. We live in a liberal, we're swimming in a big liberal pool here. And yet, this is an incredible moment because we are, I mean, in the last few days, we are going through an amazing moment in American history. President of the United States forced through absolutely ridiculous legislation about health care. So ridiculous that nobody even knows what it is. Not even the people who enacted it, especially. Now, okay, now I think everybody in this room knows that. I'm sure you know that. The question is, what do we do about it, and how do we use it? Because it's not, you know, it's evident. It's not, and yet, you know, you can watch television, you can watch CNN or MSNBC if you can handle it. And you see what we used to call cognitive dissonance going on. You see people discussing these things almost, you know, you think they're in an alternative universe. So the thing is in front of all of us, because otherwise we're just spinning our wheels, really. And, you know, okay, it's nice to come to gatherings like this. I enjoy it. I'm really pleased to be here. I'm an old-time Los Angelino. I live in the Hollywood Hills, very close to here, and my daughter goes to school in Hancock Park. It's nice to see there are other people that agree with me. And that's good. But I'd like to be able to change things. And I think that's what we're all here for. And so it's trying to analyze how we do that. That it is the key to everything. And it's real hard. Because, I mean, I used to, my late and very good friend, Andrew Breitbart, and I used to fight all the time. And I'll tell you, I haven't really admitted this in public, but I will give you the nub of it. And I think I was right in the argument, naturally. Andrew always said, oh, isn't it horrible how conservatives are always discriminated against in Hollywood? And I would say, yeah, Andrew, but everybody is discriminated against in Hollywood. Unless you're, you know, Steven Spielberg or something. It's horrible. And he would go, I know. So after that, he didn't speak to me for months. But I mean, I only bring up that illustration because I think all of us have to look real hard at how we do this, because I don't know about the rest of you, but I have members of my own family don't speak to me. My own sons speak to me, but they think their father's like, you know, something's gone wrong with him. and yet, really, my political views are very close now to my late deceased father, who voted for Stevenson. So that's how strange things have come in our society. So how do we get there? And I think in coming back to the events of the last few weeks, there's been a huge battle going on, I think many of you know, in the Republican Party. A battle between people who define themselves as maybe Tea Party, and then the rhinos or the establishment and all that. And my attitude toward that is screw it. I think it was a huge mistake that a war broke out. And I'm saying that in a group of people who are titularly Tea Party. I'm nothing. I mean, I admire the Tea Party, but I never identify with everything. After I quit the left, I followed the famous line of Groucho Marx that I would never join a club that would have me as a member. I think you all know. But I mean, I certainly agree with the Tea Party, and everybody does. That our culture is our government spends way too much money, and we're going bankrupt. Now, I think that's the bottom line thing behind all this, and it's why Obamacare, partly, but why Obamacare is ridiculous. It's also ridiculous for other things, but it's part of the reason it's ridiculous. And on the other hand, we have what happened was we're rolling back a few weeks, and this is what we all have to wrestle with really right now. We had that event where the far right of the Republican Party closed down the Congress for a while, and the moderates rebelled against them. Now, everybody in this process was claiming that they didn't like Obamacare. Now, I will accept them at face value. There might be some liars in there, but I'm accepting them at face value. So what we really had was a huge split going on in the Republican Party while Obama, who is in my estimation the worst president in my lifetime, and I'm over 20, probably as the lady that everybody's lifetime. That includes anybody here in their 130s, and Andrew Johnson or anybody else. And while this person had rammed through legislation that nobody, not even his own people, wanted or knew what it was, our party and the people that we identify with were fighting with each other. How crazy is that? I mean, it seems to me that that's the very moment for all of us, and this is what I wanted to talk to you about a lot, because I'm trying to figure out how to do this, is for us to become Alinsky. We have to be the new Alinskys. Now, we can't do it in the same way. Look, I got this idea. I'm not the only one who did it. Several other people have said this. But because, you know, you're looking at somebody who used to be a donor to the Black Panther Party, okay? So I have come from way over here. I pulled off the shelf my Rules for Radicals and started looking at it. A little bit, I mean, it was falling apart. It was a little, I hadn't read it in a long time. Anyway, I couldn't figure out exact equivalencies because I was going to write something for PJ Media about that, you know, rules for conservatives or some sort of silly thing. But I couldn't figure out the exact, but I'm trying to figure out how we do that, because I don't like to say, you know, what Alinsky said was essentially what Marx said, which is the ends justify the means. So you guys can lie all you want because we're on the right side. Now, what's happening on our side is we just fight each other instead. And, you know, it seems to me a lot about strategy and not about what the ends is. I mean, most of the fight that went on the last few weeks in the Republican Party that I can see was about whether or not Ted Cruz should have done what he did instead of using some other method, which there are probably many, to highlight how bad Obamacare is. Now, look, I'm not here to diss Ted Cruz, who, friends of mine, my dearest friend, Michael Ledeen, is now doing foreign policy advising for him, and he says he's a great guy. I believe it. I think that the big mistake, I'm not going to get into that mistake of saying I don't think Cruz is good because he's bad and I'm for Rand Paul or whatever. Forget that. What I'm trying to say is, how do we now put all this behind us and use this moment, which is extraordinary, because this legislation that they put before us makes no sense on any level. I mean, if I were if I were Lenin, I wouldn't like it. I mean, although interesting thing about Lenin was that Lenin wrote, apparently I've been reading up on this stuff, Lenin wrote that the best way to make a society communistic or socialistic was through its healthcare system. And I have suspicion that if I read that, Barack Obama, who probably has only read things like that, read it too. Because I mean, that's where his living. Speaking of which, here's an interesting thing about me, and I think about a lot of people in my generation, because I was friends with Timothy Leary personally. I mean, so I mean, it's like I come from that world, and I read Marx and Marcuse and all that stuff up and down when I was in college and graduate school and afterwards, and when I was a radical organizer and all that stuff. Until after September 11th and all those things happened to me and I got involved starting Pajamas Media and all that stuff, I had never read people like Hayek. I had never read Milton Friedman. I'd never read them. And I think that I'm not alone in that. I think there are a lot of people who just never read any of that stuff. And I think one of those people who never read none of this stuff is the President of the United States. Because I think he never read it because, look, I'm not dissing him in this. I think he's a product of a similar environment to me. So he was not, no one told him to read it. And I didn't read it till I got angry. So and he had no reason to get angry because they were making him king. So why read it? I mean, it makes no sense. But the truth, if you look back at, I think the most interesting moment in all the political of the last year, in the 2008 campaign, that guy Charles Gibson from ABC asked a question to Barack Obama while he was running for office. He said, well, what about this evidence that if you lower taxes, the government actually gets more money? And Obama said, he sort of like, I looked so much. For a moment, I thought, well, he never heard that before, which I think, people in here know of as the Laffer curve and all that. Arthur Laffer, the economist, analyzed all that. But whether he knew about it or not, I don't know. But then he said, well, it doesn't matter because it's not fair. So that was the moment, I think that was the defining moment to me, of who this man is. And I think that explains the mess we're in a lot of ways. It doesn't explain the foreign policy mess is explained by a different thing. But the economic mess is explained by this kind of peculiar idea of fairness. And fairness is not based on what's good for people. It's based on what he thinks is kind of vengeance in a certain way. Because if you look at it right now, all that stuff about Bill Clinton being the first black president and blah, blah, blah. Actually, he was a better black president. Because black people and African Americans in our society were much better off under Clinton than they were under Obama. So that, and it's partly because I think Bill Clinton just a plain ordinary big liar, and he's actually, in the secret heart, pretty much a conservative. But because of who he is and what he happened to him, his life story, he could never possibly admit it, perhaps even to himself. But he is the one who made the deal with Gingrich, as we all know, to change the welfare system and actually improved a lot of people. That's what one of the, just vamping here, one of the most interesting things that happened to me after my political change and I started BJ Media and my name got out as someone on the right instead of someone on the left, kind of like Backfield in Motion, if you remember that old song. I got email from this guy, Michael Berman. Does anybody know who he is? He's the brother of Howard Berman. So I got this email. I didn't know he was, I just got an email from some guy named Michael Berman. And he said, I've been reading your blog and all this stuff. And I'm very interested in what you've been writing about your political transformation. So I said, would you like to have lunch with me? So I was a little cagey because I don't have lunch with anybody, almost anybody. But and then back and forth, I realized he was the brother of Howard Berman. So that's interesting. So I went out to have lunch with him, and one of the most interesting things happened. He said, I've been reading your writing, and he said, you had a political change after 9/11. I said, yeah. He said, well, I had it a long time before you. I said, what? You were the campaign manager of your brother, of Henry Waxman, of John Tunney. Also, he was the guy who invented, I'm really talking out of school here. You're the guy who invented targeting not emails, letters in those days, email, where they would, target exact neighborhoods with solicitations and so forth. Anyway, and he said, so I said, why did you change? You changed? He said, well, family, I can't really say, but so he said, so why? He said because of what the Democratic Party did to black people. And I went, holy shit, because I worked in the civil rights movement, and I went, wow. So that's now. I think that's an interesting story for a Los Angeles group, because we live in a city of perpetual, stupid racial strife. I moved here in 1970, and it hasn't changed. And what has happened is that people have not gone out on the right and made the case, except for Jack Kemp and a few people, that there's a wholly different way than Al Sharpton to change things, because Al Sharpton doesn't want to change things. He has no interest in it. Any imbecile can see it. If things change, he's unemployed. Or he certainly loses his big swack. But it's just not that. It's with the Latino community, all these communities. And we sit here, and mostly, I see very few people of color in this room. I wish there were more. What happened was when we were putting together PJ Media, we brought in a lot of people. We went out and found a lot of black conservatives, and they're great ones. In this community, Joe Hicks and a lot of people are just fabulous. And those people understand. I would say they, and gay conservatives too, all those people have more guts than I'll ever have. Because all I lost was a couple of Hollywood kids. They lost a lot of stuff with their friends. And I've seen it. But I think, by the way, and I have a special plea, having a daughter I have kids in two generations. And my younger daughter, the 15-year-old who goes to school here in Marlboro, here in Hancock Park, is politically aligned with people in this room. My older sons are not. And it's interesting because they were the product of a marriage when everybody was on the left. And now the other marriage. So kids are a lot, they rebel, but they also listen. And what was really interesting, and I think that this group became an interesting story, is that my daughter is a member of a group called JSA, I think it's called Junior Scholastic. It's for high school kids interested in politics. So she went to a thing down in the South Bay at some Marriott where they had hundreds of these high school kids, and they caucused with various groups. They caucused Republican, they caucused Democrat, and they caucused Libertarian. Who was the biggest group? Yes. Very interesting. And I think the reason is branding, and also the one area where the younger generation, and this is, I think, very important to us if we want to change minds. And I admit that I am socially liberal, so you have to excuse me if you're not. But I think that area is lethal for the Republican Party with young people. Because those kids are all ready to listen to us on economic issues. Boy, are they. They're the ones who are looking at no jobs, $50,000 a year to go to college, all these kind of things that are absurd. I mean, you have to be a nitwit not to see it. But they say, oh, but Republicans, they don't like my gay friends. Bad. You cannot give up. I mean, if you come from a religious background that is opposed to gay marriage, I respect you. I don't happen to, but if you do, that's fine. But I think we should keep that stuff in that area, not keep it out of the political sphere. In fact, I would say take marriage out of politics. You give people, civil unions, that's it, and that way it doesn't become an issue of politics. I mean, I don't want to argue with the Bible, but I don't think that we should get into that. And I think the kids are going to, seeing the kids, it's very interesting. Learn so much if you, I don't know how many of you have teenage kids or grandkids or whatever in this room. You talk to them, wow. I mean, that's what this is all about. I mean, that's all Obamacare nonsense and the ridiculous amount of deficit our country. I mean, I look around this room and I see a lot of contemporaries to me. No offense. But I wish I saw more young people. One of the reasons we're not seeing maybe more young people, besides the fact it's a weeknight, besides the fact the Lakers are playing tonight, is that that issue. And I make a plea. I've done this in writing on PJ Media. I get attacked by a lot of social conservatives. I really don't mean to offend them. But when you discuss that issue, you're dealing with people very deep feelings. And I understand those feelings. But I mean, we've got to say, and in California, it couldn't be more obvious. I mean, if you're, in New York or California, the handwriting has been on the wall forever. I mean, look, we're 4 minutes from West Hollywood here. So let's get serious. So you cannot begin to have the slightest whiff of discrimination against gays any more than you would against blacks. Now, one of the things I want to say, and the most important thing this group, we should all, I'm going to stop on this one. We have to figure out how to stop the propaganda against the Tea Party. We have to figure that out. I think the greatest thing that Andrew Breitbart did when the bullshit came up about the Tea Party being racist and he offered $100,000 to anybody who could prove it, and nobody came forward for $100,000. He did something very smart. I have worked with Tea Party people at PJ Media of all sorts for many years now, because I ran the thing for 7 years till I stopped in February. So I worked with white people, Asian people, Latino, Black. I did not hear one jot of racism among anybody in that group the whole time I worked there, and there were hundreds of people who came through at various times. And they were, working for me, there were like, I don't know, maybe a couple of hundred people have worked for me either part-time or full-time during that period when I was CEO. And I would have canned anybody instantly for racism because I was in the civil rights movement. Nothing happened. Zero. So it is 100% bullshit. Now, the real question is, okay, I think everybody knows that. How do we counteract it? One way, I mean, part of it is projection. Because I heard more racism on the left when I was a lefty than I did on the right. But the real question is, how do you, I mean, I've actually written that down in public, but one of the problems that we've had is that we talk to each other all the time. How do we talk to the other guys and get them to listen without going, know, that's what they always do. I mean, or, you know, what recently I guess they were calling the Tea Party jihadists. Right, okay. I've seen a lot of them in the Tea Party. Anyway, I mean, it's really crazy. So how do we counteract that? And, you know, Andrew had a great idea. I wish I had other ideas. But we all have to think about that. But the other thing is, I've noticed about political change, and I should shut up because I'm going on. Is that if you tell people you're an idiot, even if they are, and they usually are, you don't change them. They tend to not like you. So what you really have to do is figure some way. I wrote something about this on PJ Media a couple of weeks ago about I used my old screenwriter chops for a hypothetical Thanksgiving. And, you know, what do you do? You're sitting there at the table. I don't know how many of you have split families on this stuff, but a lot of us do. I do. And you just like, gee, I'm trying to figure out why the Obamacare website kept falling down, but the Apple website sold 9 million iPhones over the weekend. How does that happen? You just say it kind of like you're confused. Of course, the real truth is once private industry was the government, and everybody knows that. But what the trick is to try to get them to figure that out for themselves, I think. But then if they do get near figuring that out, then you don't say, you're an idiot. You say, yeah, maybe you're right. You give them, I learned this at work, you know, working for various voices in Hollywood and everywhere. If you wanted to get something accomplished, make the other guy think it's his idea. Anyway, I don't know that refers to politics. So I think in a weird way it does. Because, I mean, most liberals think they use it as religion. They think they know everything. But if you give them the specifics, of course, they have to come up with our conclusion. Then if they come up with our conclusion, you say, yeah, you're right. But don't say for a minute you were thinking of that for the last 15 years. All right, well, that's it for me.
I'll do some announcements and then Q&A.
Okay. All right. Look, I'm not going to quarrel or debate natural law here. I don't want to. I'm not smart enough, really. And when I say I'm not being phony, I'm not Thomas Aquinas. Here's what I think we should do. I 100% agree with you that the other side brings this up, and the reason they bring it up as a wedge issue is pretty obvious. I think we all know that. In this room, there are probably people who feel different ways about this issue. I mean, I can tell right away by some people applauding this, others that. I respect everybody's opinion on this because I really believe in freedom of worship. Therefore, I respect, when you say you're evangelical, I totally respect your view. Now, what I think we should do, and maybe it's because the older I get, the more libertarian I get, is take a libertarian attitude toward this. The state can give this is what I would do. Now, I don't think this is going to happen, but I think it's the solution. The state can give civil unions. Gay people want to have live together domestically probably doesn't bother you that much. First of all, you'd go nuts if you're stopping it, considering you're living in Los Angeles. However, and then the marriage itself becomes defined by churches, synagogues, and other similar organizations. And they are free to define marriage as the people who follow those faiths or that sect of that faith because I'm Jewish. Certain Jewish groups will have gay marriage, others won't. And a Jewish person is free to join, just as a Christian person is free to join whichever denomination they want to join, and they should be free to, and that's what that I'm sure is what the founders intended. Now, I also, to be completely honest, in all likelihood, the founders would have probably freaked out over gay marriage. Because, I mean, it's a fairly new phenomenon. Well, it's not that new. But, I mean, maybe they wouldn't have, because they were pretty smart people. And, you know, and obviously we know from reading Greek literature that it's nothing new under the sun here. But I think because we're at a point in our country where there's so much hanging, we're on the verge of losing the place, that we can't give them that weapon. When I see all those kids talking about it, the reason is you as a black man should know this. That stuff can be used so primitively. I am sure you are not, hearing you speak for 3 seconds, I know that you have no anger in your heart toward your gay brothers and sisters. You probably have not an ounce. On the other hand, your religion says that's not marriage. We are in a very screwed position because they are using against us anything possible. And the war on women is one of the greatest mythologies that ever occurred. I mean, that's just absolute horse manure. But to take those issues off the table, away from them, and just laugh in the old Reagan way, that great thing he did all the time, there you go again. I think that's the answer. Let those, first of all, the truth about social issues, even abortion. I am much more traditionally conservative on abortion. I agree with the right to life people. I happen to agree that life begins at the moment of conception because scientifically I can't figure out another time. It's not any more complicated than that. However, I think we take those issues out of the public sphere as much as possible. And there's a double reason for that, is that in reality, society doesn't pay attention to the government on those questions anyway. I mean, if you want to change, if your job as an evangelical, using you or anybody else in the room, it's not fair to you since you asked the question, I'm using you, is to convince other people of the righteousness of your position, which you are certainly entitled to do. I think the best place to do that is not in the political sphere. Because I think people make those decisions about those kind of personal things between their priests and rabbis and ministers and psychiatrists and friends and family, and I think that stuff is better dealt with there. I mean, what should be dealt with in the political sphere is whether we go to war with Iraq or whether we raise taxes or what do we do about the debt. I mean, let's stick to that stuff, where I would bet, certainly on economic things, 100% or 98% of the room in this room will agree. Because we're in a situation where we better think about the things we agree on and not get lost on those other issues. Medium ran afoul. I think the medium ran has been afoul forever. I mean, and my wife and I have written a play that we're in the midst of rewriting about a man named Walter Duranty. People know who he is. You know, he was the New York Times reporter in Moscow in the 20s and 30s who lied about Stalin's mass starvation of the Ukrainians. I mean, yeah, he won the Pulitzer Prize. I mean, he was in many ways worse than Dan Rather. so you know, it's not new under the sun. And what's interesting about Duranty, because we've done a lot of research obviously on the guy, is he wasn't a communist. He did most of this stuff for self-aggrandizement. And one of the interesting things that I think when you're looking at these people in the media who are driving you crazy on a Sunday morning when you watch the shows or wherever, is that these people are rich, powerful, and they don't want to lose their money or power. And that's the primary thing that drives their politics. I don't know if what they believe, but they know what they're supposed to believe. No good answer. I mean, we all know Sodom and Gomorrah. We've all read the Bible. Here's my concern. We have to win here. There's no question. Right now, we have to win. I mean, nothing like, it's time. That's why I began this whole thing, because that's been obsessing me. There's a very good piece, if you haven't read it, in National Review, competitor of Pajamas Media, I know, but we're all friends, so we know, and I'm very good friends with the guys who wrote this. Ramesh Ponnuru and Rich Lowry wrote a whole long essay. It just came out. What was it called? You just read it too. It just came out the other day. It's on the National Review site. And it's all about, let's stop the circular firing squads for a while. Right now, the enemy is too big. And that's really what it is. I mean, look, you and I could have dinner and sit and discuss this forever. And it might be really interesting. And you seem like a really nice woman, and it would be a fascinating discussion. And we may agree on things and disagree, I don't know. But we sure in hell agree that there's something really wrong in our country right now. And if we let these things just make us, fighting it, I mean, when I see, all this attacks on this one's a rhino, this one's too right-wing, I start to go, oh my God. Right now, we've got, David Axelrod to deal with.
All right. Is there a question not about the right? All the way in the back.
Oh, I think that's tendentious. I think a wise man, actually even better than Sun Tzu. My favorite book by one of the most humanitarian people of all time who is much maligned is Niccolo Machiavelli's The Prince. If you have never read that really carefully, it's a work of extraordinary genius. He was also a great playwright, by the way, in case you didn't know it. Anyway, Machiavelli was a totally brilliant man, and he followed that principle, because you don't win anything by trying to win everything at once. You lose. You've lost it all. I mean, you get to be right. You get to, one of the interesting things, I wasted a lot of money in psychotherapy in my life. But one of the few things I learned in there that was true is a lot of the time I'm just trying to be right. Not right politically, but right, you know what I mean? That's how you screw up a marriage or everything else. And you don't, no one, sir, in all due respect, your first question was absolutely fair. But if you then extrapolate from that you've got to win on everything the first time around, you're going to lose on everything. You haven't got a damn chance. And, if you want things to be that way and you want everybody in this room to lose, fine. But remember, that's what you've done. I started. It's had its ups and downs. It started as Pajamas Media, of course, in 1996 and 95. We were putting it together, me and a guy who since went back to being a really rabid liberal, a guy named Charles Johnson, a Little Green Footballs blog, and Glenn Reynolds, the Instapundit, who's one of the great human beings of our time, I think. And you know, we were blogging and we were getting a lot of hits for our blogs, but being Americans and capitalists, we got together and said, well, can we make some money out of this? So we never really did make much, but we did make some. And you know, we found a backer, and that's how it all happened. And then it evolved that we wanted to try the TV part. We did that starting in the initial broadcast, which I was the host for, was at the Republican convention of '08. Yeah, that's when it started at the Minneapolis convention, and we had our own booth there and everything. And you know, it's very hard to make money on the internet, as many of you have had. But that's at least a 3-hour discussion. But I mean, we're at a point in the history of media where everything is nothing is the only one who makes. There's only one person on the right who makes money in the media, and Lord love him, and that's Matt Drudge. But the other business plans are unsuccessful.